What if the reason your breakthrough hasn't come yet is because you've been skipping steps in the instructions God has given you? You know, God didn't ask Joshua to fight, He asked him to walk. And sometimes your biggest battle is simply obeying Him, even when it doesn't make sense. So today we're diving into Joshua 6 and learning how radical obedience unlocks supernatural victory and why silence, timing, and surrender are all part of God's winning strategy. So the first lesson we see is that God's strategy won't always make sense. And girl, it ain't supposed to. You know, Romans 11:33 tells us that His ways, they are past finding out. And in Isaiah 55:8, God Himself tells us that His thoughts are not our thoughts and His ways, they're not our ways. God's strategy often doesn't make sense to us because we view it from our present circumstance, whereas He orchestrates and designs this strategy with both the end and the beginning of our situation in mind. So let's talk about how insane God's instructions to Joshua and by extension the Israelites were. So firstly, Joshua 4:13 tells us that about 40,000 men prepared for war. These were the fighting men, as the Bible describes them. They crossed over the Jordan River. So now these same 40,000 plus 7 men, or the 7 priests who were carrying the ram's horn, plus the Levitical priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant, that was the group of people who were responsible for marching around the city of Jericho. They received the instructions from God, through Joshua to march around the city. So now if you think organizing 40,000 fighting men, people who just want to get in there and, get the job done, if you think organizing them just wasn't crazy enough, let's talk about rallying them, those 40,000 plus people, for something that was like a walkathon. Jericho was described as a fortified city because it had both an exterior and interior wall. So don't think he was going to hop this and get into the city. And the size of it was roughly about 6 to 8 acres. So this group of men, they were given specific instructions that detailed their formation, right? The armed men were to lead the march, and then they were followed by the 7 priests carrying the ram's horn. And then they were followed by the Levitical priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant. And then behind them were another group of fighting men. They were also told how long this was going to last and all the things they were supposed to do and not do during this time. So you'd think that with so many fighting people, God's strategy would at least involve some rope climbing, some rock throwing, some arrow shooting, one little sword fight, something, right? But instead, it involved what we could only describe as sacred worship. Sometimes God's instructions don't look productive because they don't use what we consider to be our natural skills and abilities. I mentioned last week that I am working on a project that I haven't shared just yet because it's a bold and a hefty move for me. And when God gave me the instructions, I almost asked Him if His hair to swing. Because you see what on my bank account, you don't need the password to get in. You see what I'm working with here. And it's because of what He's told me I need to invest in it. The math just ain't mathin'. But I did it anyway because I trust Him enough to know that if He's given me these insane instructions, He's already called the end from the very beginning. The second thing we learn is that silent seasons, they are strategic. So the walls fell after obedience, not before. And I've often wondered why, if God in all His sovereignty, right, He already knows that I'm going to obey Him and as a result get what He's promised. And if that's the case, then why we got to do the song and dance where I got to do the hard thing? You already know I could do it. So let's just skip this and get to the good part, right? But after complaining about this, yesterday He said to me that He requires that I follow His instructions so that I could prove to myself and the enemy that I am willing to follow Him. And also, it's because it's in the doing of the hard, the uncomfortable, the unreasonable thing that I develop the character needed to keep what He's giving me and to stay in where He's placing me. So anyway, this walkathon with the children of Israel and the armies and the priests, this continued on for about 7 days. So day in and day out, these 40,000 plus people marched around what was roughly the size of 4 to 6 football fields put together. I want you to get the visual of this, right? So the soldiers alone had to have been exhausted because, again, they were prepared for war. So they marched in their full getup. They had shields, helmets, swords, spears, everything they needed to fight. So given this, why then would God require them to march in complete silence? I think that if they were allowed to speak, how soon do you think it would have been before somebody said, this don't make no sense, and boy, I tired, and my foot hurting. Why does got to be so long? How long after the complaining started before one person said, boy, I ain't doing this no more, and they just broke up and left the formation? I believe God required them to do this in silence so that their words didn't interrupt or disrupt his plans. It's not so much what we see or even experience that delays our access to the promises of God. It's the words we speak that then get implanted in our hearts, and that begins to move us out of alignment. And God saw this movie before. He saw this play before. Remember when the 12 spies went out to survey the land of Canaan under Moses? And remember how all it took was for the spies to give one bad report about Canaan for the children of Israel to say, you know what, forget this, and not just forget what God was promising to do. Forget how he just parted the Red Sea, kill all the Egyptians who was chasing them, rain down manna from heaven to feed their little ungrateful behinds, was a cloud by day to guide them in the desert, and then a pillar of fire by night. Like, how quickly they forgot because of one bad word. So God pretty much said to them, now who are marching around Jericho, since I can't trust y'all mouth because I saw this play before, y'all keep it closed. And I think too, the Holy Spirit speaks to our hearts, and it's so easy or much easier to keep a singular focus on what he said when we don't give a voice to the thoughts that try to make us doubt who he is and what he said. And then let's talk about how strategic God is, right? And just how much of an ultimate screw this would have been with this whole mind game. Can you imagine living inside Jericho and seeing 40,000 plus men just marching around your city in total silence with only the sound of the ram's horn being blown every now and then? You let a couple of people you never met march around your yard, not saying anything, but just beating one or two goatskin drum and just doing it in complete silence, and tell me that wouldn't freak you out. The third lesson we learn is that faith is proven in repetition. I don't know when we became so spoiled. We somehow think that if we don't see the results immediately, then either this word wasn't from God or we just ain't interested in doing it no more. Like we rather abandon it because it's taken too long, it's too hard, this ain't what I signed up for. The group of men, they marched around this large city, Jericho, 6 to 8 acres, a total of 13 times before they saw anything happen. Obedience isn't glamorous. It's not something that we could brag about or boast about or post about. And it's usually because it looks so ridiculous. I know it's easy to become discouraged by what looks like a lack of progress, especially when you're doing what God has told you to do. But I promise you, baby, keep walking, because the next lap you take, the very next step you take could be the one that changes everything. The fourth lesson we see here is that the shout, it only comes after the walk. So sometimes we think we could cherry pick parts of God's instructions and still get whatever it is he's promised. Listen to me, darling. God doesn't use filler words. Everything he says has meaning, it is important, and it must be followed. Some of us just want to get to the part where we shout down walls we haven't even walked around. Like the Israelites, God has guaranteed your victory, but he's not coming to do the walking for you. The victory is his to guarantee because he's prepared it for us. So that's the thing we cannot do. So you cannot do God's part, but baby, he will not do your part. If you've been in a season of marching, waiting, or staying silent, I want you to know that God sees your obedience and he's already declared you victorious. So what's one area of your life where God is asking for full obedience? Do me a favor, And just drop it in the comments, because I would love to pray with you, because that's how we make it through. It's only by prayer. And has God ever told you to do something that you know was crazy, like it made absolutely no sense at the time He gave you the instruction? Let's talk about it. And if this video has blessed you, go ahead and like it, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that obedience is their greatest weapon.